So I end up going with this guy at 5 o'clock. I found out that he was the governor's son. I'm staying in the governor's palace. That's not a bad deal. And I meet the governor and have dinner. And the governor toasts a strange coffee made out of syrup and says to my young friend from Texas, he says, when you come to our country, you must see Machu Picchu. You must go to the Inca fortress. I never heard of it. I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't an anthropologist or anything like that. So he put that in my ear. So I went down and I surfed Miraflores, and I went and hitchhiked down to Chicama Bay and surfed there by myself. Fantastic surf. Hitchhiked back up, dropped my stuff off, got my backpack, hitchhiked back down towards Arequipa, and took a train ride up to Cusco, and then I hiked up to Machu Picchu. I'm now at the Inca Fortress, where he told me to go. And if you've never been to Machu Picchu, it's an amazing, surreal, panpipe-sounding, beautiful place. It's around 11, 12,000, 10,000 feet up or whatever. And you're not supposed to spend the night on the place. You have to come down off that and go to the hotel or go back down into the town. But I'm kind of a Mr. Magoo. You know what a Mr. Magoo? If it says go left, you go right kind of thing. So I decided I was going to stay there. So I'm hiding under this little area that had this thatched roof, hiding in there while the guard's leaving and just waiting. And I was going to just stay there for the night, my backpack. And with me, I had books with me. I always carried books with me. And I really had to relieve my bladder. There was no bathrooms up there. And so I got down on my knees and I was relieving my bladder, and something moved underneath me. Now, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but this is what happened. As I was trying to relieve my bladder, something moved, and I thought like a rat or something moving, but it was actually a human being. There was a lady there who was an archaeologist that had decided that she was going to stay for the night also, and I peed close to her, I guess. And so she was moving. And she didn't want the federal officials to find her up there because then she would have to leave. So I met her, and you know, that's a very interesting way to meet somebody. But we spent the next 2 weeks together, and she was a beautiful French French-Canadian archaeologist from Quebec. So I was at the right place at the right time to meet the right individual. So we had lovemaking. So it was being Italian, you know. And we had this fantastic evening. I woke up that morning, and she was still sleeping, and it was a bit foggy, and it was just getting light out. And I thought I'd just wait for her to wake up. And I reached in my backpack, and I pulled out a book that I'd picked up at a health food store, and it was called The Chiropractic Story by Marcus Bach. Now, all the way through school, prior to that, I was interested in health. I lived at a health food store for a while, which I didn't put in the story. I was studying every different form of natural thing there was. Paul Bragg was a naturopath. I'd considered being a naturopath. My parents were going to a chiropractor, so I considered chiropractic. But naturopathic was limited in scope. Chiropractic had a broader scope. Osteopathic was a little bit more medically oriented, and I didn't believe there was an excess of drugs or an excess of organs and a deficiency of drugs. I really didn't like that. I went pre-med, and I got honor society, but I didn't like that approach. But when I read the book, The Chiropractic Story, if you've never read it, it's a worthy read. As I read it, tears came out of my eyes, and I knew that moment, this is it. For the teaching, healing, and philosophy, for the healing component and philosophical component, I found my niche. And I knew that that was the path. I knew that I was going to travel the world and teach, but I knew that I was going to be involved in healing along that path. And that book was a catalyst in deciding that moment at Machu Picchu that I'm a chiropractor. And I really believe that it's wise to remember the moment you were called and not forget that, because sometimes we get so busy we forget the moment we had our epiphany for our pursuit. But that's how I got involved in chiropractic. That was the journey. But every one of those steps were necessary for me on my journey. Because today, when my teacher said he would never be able to read, I've been blessed to now read over 30,700 and something books. Never be able to write. I've written well over 100 and something books. Never be able to communicate. We've reached 5.5 billion people now with communication. Never go very far in life. I've traveled over 20 million miles on flight, and I don't even know how much in sailing now. And never amount to anything. I'm a fucking multi-millionaire. Fucking is future understanding of conscious knowledge inspiring neurological growth. It's a sacred acronym. So, the very thing you're told you may not be able to be doing, the very challenge you may have faced, may be the very catalyst that you needed to fulfill your mission. None of that's a mistake. I really believe that all that's part of the journey. So that's a little bit of the story about how I became a chiropractor. I don't know if that's a long version, but it gives you some background on maybe why I'm here and doing what I do.
So I'm interested, does anyone have a follow-on question for Dr. John about that beginning journey?
What happened to that French archaeologist?
We had to part when I left Peru, and we had writing in those days. We didn't have emails. She didn't have a phone. I didn't have a phone. So I never saw her again. Never got to communicate other than by a written letter. But I never got a response. So I don't know. Never saw her again. But I was led to Quebec to go speak many times, just in case I thought I'd run into her. But there's a movie in that. But that was the journey. And there's many other pieces of that, but that's at least part of it.
Awesome. You guys learning something? Yeah. Dr. John, tell us a little about then your journey into practicing. I believe it was in New York City, or where you started your practice?
In Texas first.
Texas first, right.
Well, when I started chiropractic college, I was at Texas. And by then the way I made it through school is teaching. So I would get up in the morning at 2 o'clock in the morning and do some yoga and do speed reading, because by then I was pretty good at speed reading. And I would read 4 to 7 books in the morning usually. And then I would go to school, I wasn't supposed to be in clinic, but I was sneaking in a clinic in my first year. And then at night at 7 to 10, I taught every night. So I used to make about $100,000 a year while I was going to chiropractic college, teaching each night, 7 nights a week, and giving reviews for classes and whatever I could teach, I did. Because I realized that if I want to learn something, if I teach it, I'd learn it better, more effectively. So I did that all the way through. When I got that way, I also did health food stores and gyms and other places. I was doing talks, and I was generating patients. So I had, more people you meet and greet, the more you treat. So I was out exposing myself, because you can leverage yourself by speaking.
I would write it down, by the way. The more people you meet and greet, the more you...
Yeah, if your innermost dominant thought is your patient's innermost dominant thought is your practice. But unless you have them at the key focus. Can I go off on a tangent a second? I was consulting for a chiropractor in Chicago a number of years back. And we had dinner the night before. I was going to spend the day in his office. And we had dinner the night before. And I said, I'd like to ask you a very important question. I'm going to get a piece of paper out here, and I want you to name the name of all the patients you can think of, and make a list of all the names of the patients you can think of. And the second you pause for more than a second, we'll stop. And we'll see what number that is. And so he started rattling off names. And when he got to 68, he paused, and he was starting to lose the names. And I asked him, how many days a week does he practice? He says 4. And I said, so multiply 4 times 68, and that's basically 270-something patients, whatever. I said, you see about 260, 270 patients a week? And he goes, exactly. I said, would you like to see more? He says, of course. I said, here's what I'm going to do. Just tonight, I want you to go home and stop by your office if necessary, and I want you to memorize 1,000 patients' names. And make sure you know their names, their spouses' names, their kids' names, the company they work for, their primary chief complaint, primary subluxations. Just memorize all that and just start having that in your mind. Now, he averaged between 1 and 2 patients a day, new patients. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3, but an average around 1 to 2. We had 5 new patients the next day while I was in his office, 5. 2 of them were people he put on that list that he memorized that night. So out of sight, out of mind. Your innermost dominant thought becomes your outermost tangible reality. Whatever you're thinking about, you're bringing about. And I'm a firm believer in making sure that your dominant thought is your patients. When you care about humanity, you get massive impact. So I wanted to expose myself to as many names as possible, as many speaking opportunities as possible. And when I was in school, that's how I grew my practice. And most people weren't doing this. They struggled in clinic. And I was able to help other doctors with my patients that I was generating, hand them over to other doctors and train them. So I was training chiropractors when I was in school. And they started working for me. If they did labs for me, or if they did radiographs for me, if they did adjustments or whatever, I would give them my credits because I had more than I needed. I never was satisfied with the standard that the school expected. If I was to follow the standard in school, if I got out of school, I wouldn't be surviving. So I said, I would need to find out what it takes to thrive out there and find out that standard and set that as my standard, because my standard of reading and studying and learning and clinical was way higher than what the clinic was. So I multiplied everything times 10. So we had to have some 250 adjustments. I made 2,500. We had to have so many new patients. I multiplied it times 10, and I wanted to make sure I graduated with at least that amount. Because otherwise, when I'm out in practice, I've made a habit of something that's not going to thrive, and I want to make a habit of something that's thriving. So that helped me through school and helped a lot of other students through school. And when I got out in May of 1982, I graduated, which is 41 years ago, a month or so. I continued to speak. My speaking was the key to me generating patients. And I took every opportunity I could to speak. Is this on?
No, it's just lost us, but I've got a hand. Oh, here
Can you hear me at all?
There, are you back? Is it back? There you go. Try it. Yeah.
You can hear me better now?
Yes.
No?
Yeah.
Yep. So I went to a mall. I figured I might as well get known at a mall. And I said, hi, I'm Dr. Demartini, everybody's chiropractor. And I'd memorize their name from that department. And then I'd go to the next person, great meeting him, and I says, yes, you're working at the department store. You probably know so-and-so in the lingerie department.
But it's still working.
I said, well, yes, I do. Yes, I just saw her this morning. I'm Dr. Demartini. I saw her this morning. Their assumption was that she was a patient. I said, hi, I'm Dr. Demartini, everybody's chiropractor. You probably know so-and-so from this department and so from this department. Yes, I do. Yeah, I just saw both of them this morning. Well, all of a sudden I started having people coming into my office because they all assumed everybody else was going, and so they all leveraged it. And I introduced myself to everybody in that mall. And I don't know, I think probably 160 patients came out of that. Then I realized that that's pretty good. And so then I decided I was going to start doing restaurant seminars. So I would just start speaking loud in restaurants, and people would have to hear me. And I learned that anytime you get 7 people listening to you, you stand up while you're at the restaurant. And all of a sudden, there's now an audience. And I found that that was the most efficient way to generate an audience. You don't have to market anything. You just walk into a restaurant and start speaking. And I brought my assistant with the appointment books to schedule appointments in these restaurants. And it worked. I got a lot of patients from restaurants. And I got invited to speak at other restaurants from people that were other restaurants. I had this lady come up to me from this restaurant, La Quiche restaurant. And she said, that was the best presentation. Would you ever consider coming to my restaurant and doing that? I said, of course. So I regularly went there. I might as well go to a restaurant anyway to eat. And I found I always asked yourself, what is it I would absolutely love to do, and how do I get handsomely paid to do it? So I would love to speak, I'd love to eat, and why not get paid? Why not get paid to market? Why pay to market when you can get paid to market? So speaking became my vehicle. And then I realized that speaking one-on-one in a group was less efficient than speaking in front of a radio show or speaking on television. So I started doing radio and television and ended up converting the TV station, Channel 20, into having the show not at the studio but at my office. Because if I could have people in my office doing the TV show, it would increase the probability of doing, more patients. So I ended up having a TV show at my office in 1983. And that allowed me to expose myself to a couple million people, which helped me generate more patients. And I invited them to come to my talks every night. And then I'd have people at the talks come. And at the end of the talk, I had them do a tour of the office. And while they did a tour, I did examinations, a mini exam. And that was able to generate about 100 new patients a month just doing that. So the more people you meet and greet, the more you treat, and the more you can leverage yourself speaking. I think you mentioned that earlier. And I think that's what we have in common. We like to blab. So
Don't say anything.
I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how I started the practice.
That's very helpful. I think it's something that's fallen out of favor. I've got a little pal there, Doctor. But something that's fallen out of favor, and I couldn't wait for you to share that. That actually, that's how you built your practice. Was just going, first of all, being in the community, because these days I feel like there's this kind of fear about going in and almost because there isn't an immediate return. Sometimes there's not always an immediate return on investment for meeting and greeting. That we quantify that as a waste of time, and that just doesn't work that way, in my experience.
You got to establish a relationship with people.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman, that Dr. Robert Cote, that was in Quebec City, that I don't know if anybody has ever heard of, but he's now in Perth, Australia. But he could go into a restaurant and get anywhere from 6 to 9. I watched him get 8 patients in a restaurant one night.
Wow.
By introducing himself to everybody in the restaurant. And I thought, wow, that guy's quite bold. But he built up a very large practice in Quebec by caring enough. And people said, well, I just couldn't do that. And I said, that's because you're thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about your patients. When you think about yourself, you can live in fear. But when you think about your mission, you don't focus on that. You're focusing on, I want to serve people. And he was very inspiring to watch because he would engage people and they'd become patients. because he sincerely cared about it. You could see it was a sincere caring and wanting to serve people. And people can sense that. And when you're, again, the innermost dominant thought is service, people want to get that. They're drawn to somebody who's really inspired by their mission. If you're really on a mission, it shows. I'm on a mission. I've been doing it 50 years. It's not a thing I do, it's my life. And people can sense that. When I grew my practice, I'll tell a story about that, but then I moved my practice to a high-rise building on the 52nd floor of a building, and people said, well, how are you going to build a practice on the 52nd floor of a building? I said, I'll build it. I saw it in a vision. I follow my visions. And I realized that there were a bunch of people going up and down the elevators all day. So I decided to start doing elevator seminars. I'm not telling you to go get an elevator in your building. That's not necessary. But I got in an elevator coming down from my office, and there was one lady sitting in the direct opposite corner. You could put about 20 people in the elevator. And I thought, this is crazy. We're not even saying hi to each other. So I decided to get outside the elevator and just hold the door until it packed. And just kept waiting for it to fill up. And just held the door. And I kept telling people to come in. And then I would get on last when it's all full. And I thought really quickly, because it was about a 28-second ride to the express elevator to the 51st floor. And so I basically put together a little jingle. I said, everybody repeat with me. Everybody repeat with me. Bone out. Irritate nerve. Cause problem. Bone in. Relieve nerve. Restore life. The power that made the body heals the body. From above down, inside out. Hi, I'm Dr. Demartini. I'm everybody's chiropractor. I line spines and minds with the divine. I make people feel fine and practice galactic chiropractic. That was 27 seconds. They thought I was a bit psycho. I am. But I got 40 new patients out of an elevator the first month I moved into that office. And the case average was around $3,000, so that's about $120,000 in an elevator. And one time a guy from Quebec came and visited my office. He says, I got to see you do this elevator thing. Well, it was on a weekend and there was nobody in the building. But there were two people coming up to the exhibition, what do you call it, the viewing room on the 51st floor, as an Afro-American man and woman get on the elevator while we get on the elevator. And he says, can you do the little gig? And I said, okay. So there's only two people on the elevator. This African American man and woman, probably around 60s. And I get on the elevator and I said, hi, I'm da-da-da, and I do the whole spiel. And when I get through, the woman says to her husband, she hits him, she says, I'm not gonna hit you, hit it. It goes like that, it says, now you've been bitching about your damn back for months. Now God has sent you an angel in this elevator, and by God, you gotta listen to this angel, honey. Yes, sir, yes, sir. And I got a patient. You got to be willing to do what other people aren't willing to do. If you're not willing to do something different, you're not going to stand out. You're going to fit in. You're going to be a statistic. So the question is are you willing to do what it takes, travel whatever distance, pay whatever price to give your service of love across planet Earth? Would you agree that the worst patient you ever have is you? The second worst patient is your spouse. Yeah. Third worst patient is your family. Yeah. Fourth worst patient is your friends. But the farther they come in space and time, the more powerful the patient? So if you don't have an astronomical vision, don't expect to have a global practice. You have to give yourself permission to have a global vision, because your best patients are the ones that travel the farthest distance.
The first time I heard Dr. John say that sentence, I went home. I might have been sitting with you, Dr. Benny, and I went and bought myself an astronomical map. Because I was like, if I want to be global, I have to be thinking at that level. Asked my wife, and I went and bought globes. She hated it. Every day, every second day, there was a different globe arriving at the house from Amazon. But true story. Last time I heard Dr. John say that, I went straight home and bought that.
Yeah, I had a globe and had an astronomical map, and we had all the countries. And I made a commitment that I would have students and patients from every country on Earth. Now I have, as of 2016, students in every country on the face of the earth today. And I've traveled and spoken in 192 countries, so I still have less than 30 to go. And I was just in Saudi Arabia just a few days ago. So I'm one by one ticking off my goal that I had when I was 17. I haven't completed some of it, but I'm working on it. But I started having patients. I moved to my high-rise. There was 20 hotels within walking distance in the upper Houston, not downtown, but uptown Houston. And I started going to all those different hotels and giving my cards to them and letting them know that I'm a doctor in town, and here's my cards and everything else, and befriended the people there. And I started getting patients that were coming in for shopping and for other healthcare services, and we filled in that map with patients from different parts of the world, because I wanted to make sure that I had an astronomical vision to create a global impact. Because if I'm thinking very locally, that's great, but if I'm thinking locally like that, those are the ones that are sometimes the most disrespectful patients, the hardest patients to understand. You're not a prophet in your own house sometimes. You have to be, in your mind, see a bigger picture. So I'm a firm believer in that. I was asked one time, how did I have a global speaking game? I said, because I have an astronomical vision. That's why I called it galactic chiropractic. I always see myself as somebody looking down on the earth from a celestial view, not a terrestrial view looking out away from the earth. I always look at what do I want to do on planet Earth today from that perspective. And I've said since I was 20, the universe is my playground, the world is my home, every country's a room in the house, every city's a platform I can share my heart and soul. And that's been my statement since 20. But for the last 21 and a half years, I've been living on a ship that goes all over the world that's called the world. So I literally live on the world, traveling the world, because of that statement. So I'm a firm believer that what you say to yourself, what you see for yourself, how you feel about yourself has an impact, which is exactly what Paul Bragg told me when I was 17.
I think intuitively we all know that to reach more people in our community, we need to share. You guys understand, yes? Yeah. So my question, John, would be, what in your experience, what stops us? What holds us back from putting our head above the parapet, if you will, and sharing our voice? What keeps us small?